Hi. So my name is Jessie R. Lentz, and I'm a found object artist and sculptor. My practice focuses mainly on the collection and how hoarding behavior can become an artistic medium. The use of the found object in art has been viewed as laziness by many, and this has caused anxiety for me as an artist. The act of collection, documentation, transformation, and repurposing is embodied and documented in my compulsion to collect and preserve the ephemera of everyday life. By using objects, artists have recontextualized what art can be and how we view it. My focus is on how contemporary artistic society has continued this tradition. Though I have focused my research on the contemporary practice of found object and ready-made art, I can't help but mention where we started. Marcel Duchamp said, "Art is not about itself, but the attention we bring to it." By taking found objects and transforming them, we can understand something new about art. In my research, I have also found a distinction between the found object and the ready-made, one being the material transformed and the other being the object as art. That is to say, all ready-mades are found objects, but not all found objects are ready-mades. Collection and found objects have been used by many cultures, specifically the curiosity cabinet, which began around the 16th century, was a way for the aristocratic upper crust to show their buddies all their cool stuff. While history has documented many of these vast collections, women have been collecting the history around them through objects and the mundane relics of everyday life for as long as there have been women. Today, many artists have used the objects around us as their material of choice, elevating junk through physical transformation and the context of the display. Cornelia Parker uses objects and transforms them into something new. In her piece, Transitional Object, Psycho Barn, a barn that had been scheduled to be demolished is repurposed as the material to make a 5/8 scale version of the house from the Hitchcock classic Psycho. This was an installation on the rooftop garden of the Met in New York this past summer. A site-specific installation, this piece became part of the skyline, a strange little house just out of reach. The safety of the domestic home has been a theme in my own work. For example, the first piece I made in graduate school. Here is a child's playhouse-sized sculpture made using my grandfather's wood tools, foam, a CNC machine, and a lot of time. At first, the piece held a diorama of a dreamscape with foliage and lights, a whimsical gesture exploring how play and memory can tell stories. But over time, the piece changed. The blinds in the windows were shut, closing the narrative I had been attempting to tell, as the viewer was left to wonder what was inside. This is what it originally looked like. The idea that the piece could hold more, but was withheld from the viewer, became more important than what was actually inside of it. The form I had created and the safety I felt within the piece was more interesting than the narrative I had tried to tell. Though Felix Gonzalez Torres' artistic concepts differ from my own, he could have been called the modern master of the ready-made before his death in 1996. In contrast to the way Cornelia Parker often transforms the found objects literally, Torres uses placement and intention to elevate the objects. In his piece, Untitled Portrait of Ross in LA, a pile of candy at the healthy weight of his partner Ross, the viewer is invited to take and consume the sweets, shrinking the size of the pile, causing it to waste away, and someday, when the candy is no longer made, disappearing forever. Representative of the AIDS virus that had taken Ross and would eventually take Torres himself, this is a simple gesture with a powerful and painful concept of memory and remembrance. To continue the idea of the place object as transformative, Mike Kelly has used the collection as art material for many pieces before his death in 2012. In this piece, Memory Wear Flat, Kelly used the rainy day project of the memory or worry jar and expands upon it, making it into an expansive, vibrating object while still leaving the objects intact. Kelly has said about his Memory Wear Flat series, "I playfully give new life to unused studio materials and discarded formal and thematic considerations in a manner similar to Memory Wear's revitalization of cast-off objects." Memory Wear has been a popular project for a few centuries, still something you can see on Pinterest today, taking objects and affixing them to jugs and jars to create a beautiful mess. Kelly used toys, shells, buttons, beads, and other bits and bobs, creating almost color field-like sculptures, placing the objects in stucco and framed flat instead of in the round. The collections are more random than Torres, but no less impactful. In my piece, Hoard, Protection in a Time of Unrest, I took my own collection of toys, shells, beads, lights, coins, and Polly Pockets gathered over a lifetime and created what I called a false pile. That is to say that I built a structure that I could sit inside of to be shielded by my objects. Like in Hearth, I felt a safety in the interior, warmed by the light and surrounded by my ideas. From an outside perspective, this may be a pile of junk, but with prolonged experiences with the objects, an emotional takeaway is left with the viewer. Taking influence and overall shape from Torres and the collection aesthetics from Kelly, the piece also contained dioramas of living spaces throughout. Using dollhouse furniture and other miniatures, I created places of rest inside the chaos, in addition to the places I had carved out for myself. This piece was a turning point in how I dealt with my work from a collection standpoint. Janet Cardiff and her husband and partner, George Burns Miller, created a piece in 2014 called The Marionette Maker. This piece is an experimental installation sculpture containing multiple moving parts, dioramas, sounds, smells, and little monsters. Cardiff and Miller used the collection in a more theatrical way. Using puppets, clay models, toys, and other moving parts, the camper comes alive. And this is a video. I don't know why there's no sound. Uh-oh. There should be sound. I don't know why there's not sound. It's like a spoon hitting the sink, and the guitarist in the back, there's another puppet that I think we'll show next. Oh, there it goes. In my own work, I have been trying to find the places that collection, movement, and other sensory elements can play a part. In this piece, titled Bells and Dust, I wired 9 electronic music boxes to fruitlessly blow around charcoal powder, creating dusty images and haunting sounds. By using music boxes, I attempted to connect common memories from childhood and the idea of something that you could stumble upon, comforting but slightly unsettling. I also have a very short clip of that, if I could find. I've also attempted to use multisensory elements in my piece Silhouette and Ghost, casting objects in plaster rings and placing them in an altar or theatrical setting. I implemented both the smell of cinnamon and vanilla and the sound of white noise for calming in the installation. While I felt that these pieces had started to use the aesthetics I was hoping to create, they didn't go far enough. Taking the ideas of collection, hoarding, mourning, and ephemera, my work has been on a trajectory of discovering an authentic way of communication for my art as both an answer to a question and a language of its own. For my thesis project, I will continue the dialogue of collection and preservation, culminating in an authentic final work. My final piece is inspired by the Ponte apartments in Johannesburg, South Africa. Built in 1975, this is a strange and almost apocalyptic monolithic building. The building itself is a large tube with windows on both sides of the apartments. The thought was that it could allow more light inside of the dwelling. While the building does get light to its 55 floors, the lower floors become darker throughout the day. And besides the darkness, gang activity of the late 1980s caused crime to swell both inside and surrounding the tower. And as the building became unsafe and the owners abandoned upkeep, the first 5 floors of the tower filled with trash. Though people still live there even today, it has been considered that this building be turned into a high-rise prison, but that seems unlikely. This building reminds me of the biblical Tower of Babel. Biblical allegory has been a topic that I have found myself repeating in both my own work and the work that I am researching. The Tower of Babel was a tower built to try to reach heaven, so high it affronted God. The story goes that he changed the language of all involved so that they could no longer communicate and work together. These two different types of monoliths inspired me both as dwelling, collection, shape, and the allegorical stories that they have created in ancient and modern times. The piece I am considering creating would be an 8-foot by 5-foot pile of dioramas, boxes, storage, collection, light, and sound, surrounding a model train containing many small living spaces, as well as almost random collections throughout. This would be a logical way to bring together my love of the found object, the kinetic, the domestic, as well as trying to catch the studio mouse that can live inside of a few of the dioramas. Maybe, if I can catch him. This is a sketch of the final piece. Consisting of boxes of dioramas on the exterior and as shown here in an exploded view, the interior will hold a pile and a model train, a kinetic object which will only be able to be viewed through the windows of the dioramas I will create. The use of dioramas has been a through line with much of my work. Here we can see two examples of in-progress dioramas from past pieces. I have been inspired by the dollhouse, the Victorian ideas of the miniature, and the curiosity cabinet, and wish to continue these. The folk ideas of fairy rings have also been an important aspect of my work. In actuality, fairy rings are created when a tree dies and a ring of mushrooms grows in its place. This idea of death and rebirth in nature gives me comfort. Witchcraft and women have been throughout the stories of what fairy rings are in European and Celtic tradition. In general, you don't want to step inside a fairy ring. You could be transported to the fairy realm, which is bad news. They were also said to be where a witch had put her cauldron. These were seen as scary things for most of history, but there are some stories of prosperity coming from these circles. In my work, I have played with both the negative and the positive aspect of these stories. Placing my collection in circles, I am making wishes for things that I want to have surrounding myself. Toys for childhood wonder, shells and coins for nature and wealth, jewelry for beauty and prosperity. Creating what are essentially talismans for chaos magic, I am continuing the tradition of Celtic mysticism. Calling back to contemporary artists that have circle shapes, that have used the circle shape, have been used by Cornelia Parker in her work, 30 Pieces of Silver. Using the biblical allegory of Judas being paid 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus before he was crucified for the title, and using many beautiful precious objects like spoons, pitchers, candlesticks, and the like that have been smashed by a steamroller to create her very first large-scale installation, here in an installation view, and here is a detail. Parker has created beautiful, useless artifacts, suspended and slightly kinetic. Parker has said about her work, "Beauty is too easy. Often in my work, I take beautiful objects and do extreme things to them, so that they are overlaid with something a bit more sinister and violent." In my final work, I will be collecting and using objects I already have to create a structure that is full of allegory and moments of discovery for the viewer. As for the display, the idea would be to place this on the stage of the MFA gallery. I have been accused of being theatrical in my work, and I feel that my work doesn't read as well in a white cube, and so this piece would succeed more in a less neutral space. This work will utilize the many ideas and ideals I have prioritized as an artist and will help me grow as I leave this program and become a real person again. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to my mentor and thesis committee for your continued support.
Hi, Jesse. So I noticed in your Heareth piece, and then there was, I forget the name of the pile, the collected pile, hoard. Mm-hmm. It seems there's an element of time in your work, and I wonder if you could talk about time in your process and its importance, if any.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like time is there. I don't know if I've really discussed it or thought about it in accordance to like my actual like concepts, but like as a practice, like I either make things all at once or not at all for weeks. So I feel like with both of those pieces, I spent like days and days and days and then would abandon them for periods of time where I was just living with them. So I think it's more part of my practice rather than my concepts. Back to this one.
I have two short questions. What would you consider your most successful piece? And can you explain the significance of the train in your thesis work?
Yeah, so I feel like, for me, I feel like the horde piece was incredibly successful. I feel like it touched on a lot of different things that I had wanted to do but hadn't given myself permission to do, with the dioramas and the lighting, which was something I'd never really tried in that way. There was like soldering involved, like it was very scary. So it was something I had wanted to but hadn't been able to, and I felt like that piece was pretty successful in how I looked at my art. And what was the second question? Oh, the train. I wanted to use something that was childhood and kinetic, but there's something about the specific smells and sounds of a model train that I wanted to incorporate in this idea. So like I wanted to use it as the footprint, and then that kind of acrylic-y, plasticky smell that the train's fake smoke brings. I wanted you to be able to kind of experience that sound and smell, but not exactly know where it's coming from because it's on the inside of the pile. And so through exploration of the spaces and seeing it possibly through the windows, there's like that moment of discovery that I'm hoping to create. Does that answer? I think that has been brought up, but I haven't really explored what that means yet. But I will look into that more because that has been brought up a few times.
Jesse, there's a wonderful cohesiveness to the kind of objects that you use in your practice. It seems like you're developing a kind of personal taxonomy. Could you talk a little bit more about your selection process and how you choose the kind of objects you work with?
Yeah, I feel like me and you have had that conversation before because I didn't have an answer. Because for me specifically, like I do a lot of like finding on the street and thrift stores, and like just it's like a compulsion of an object that I feel something about. Like sometimes I'll pass by objects on the ground and I'm like, I don't need that. But other times it's like, if I don't have that, like we're gonna have a problem. So like it's something like it's a hand feeling, or it's like a color. I don't know where it's coming from, but like there's something that there's an aesthetic of these objects that's either like feeling or specific memory that I'm very attracted to.
Hey. I wanted to ask you about the idea of like playfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, like I guess in terms of selecting the objects you use, you have a lot of bright colors, a lot of toys, a lot of like buttons, so they sort of seem like something that like a child would hold
Mm-hmm.
like close to them in terms of treasures. Do you have any ideas about that? And also, is it an actual goal of yours to catch the studio mouse? And
I'm
if
hoping.
you do catch the mouse, will you like make a house for the mouse?
Yeah, so I'll start with the mouse question because it's more fun. But I'm going to be making plexiglass cages essentially for him that are going to have tubes connecting to other ones, so he can kind of run to each one. They're going to be set up as dioramas. I'm hoping to have a little painting studio for him. It's going to be really cute. And there's a couple of mice that live in the 3D shop that we see all the time, so I'm going to set up some like humane traps and see if I can get one. But we're going to see what happens. And with the buttons and the toys and stuff, like a lot of the collection, especially with Horde and with my fairy rings, are things that I have had since I was a child. I have these metal boxes just filled with little teensy tiny things because I've always been attracted to that stuff. Like I never was into Barbies, but I love Barbie accessories. Like anything like that, I'm really into that. And I used to wear overalls and like keep teensy tiny little toys. I like the idea of being able to just like keep something in your pocket and like now I have something to entertain me. So I think a lot of that is that, but I think the buttons and things are just like, that's something that you just collect. Like it just ends up in your space. They come with shirts, like extra button. And it's something really accessible. And like with everything being plastic, a lot of it is plastic, some of it's metal, but like in general, they're plastic items. It's very like 80s to now, like that like plastic toy mentality, especially Polly Pockets, like they are pill shaped. Like children do not have those today. So there's something that like for people my age and maybe a little bit older and younger, they look at those and there's like a very specific callback, like, oh, I remember playing with those. And like people come into my studio and have those moments of like remembering that playful nature that they don't necessarily have anymore. And I feel like I've never lost it. And so, I mean, I work with children now too, so they always love me because I'm right on the floor with them playing with the same toys.